minutes, so Ed is going to give us a little briefing as it relates to, is it broadband, Ed?
Yeah, a
Great.
couple of items I'd like to talk about. There is such a varying degree of positions. I think there's more difference of positions on this than what form of government did happen in Warren County, to be honest with you. And so that we are hopeful in the next few weeks is to have a broadband summit that will bring the various parties together and go through this in detail. What has happened is that the Public Service Commission, and I talked about this a couple of months ago, required, in order for the merged area of Time Warner and Charter, to require them to undertake to residence, commercial as well, 147 units throughout the state. However, there were certain areas that were designated for that area. Any area that included Time Warner currently this year is not eligible for the state program.
Say that. Yeah, say that again. I'm having a hard time.
Okay. We have two programs, the Public Service Commission, which ordered certain areas. And principally, the only area that is going to be affected is in the western part of Warren County. Evelyn is pretty familiar with what areas are and are not. That would be covered potentially under a Public Service Commission. However, that will not go into effect until next year, with a requirement date over the next 2 years. Frontier has to apply for that. Frontier did not apply for anything this first round because the deposit was a $100,000 check that they had to send in. So that's the one program under the Public Service Commission, okay, that strictly is involved in the Time Warner Charter area, which affects, obviously, the Queensbury, Glens Falls area, which there are no underserved or unserved areas. Time Warner has some effect up in Matt's area. Time Warner has some effect in the chairman's area in Warrensburg. So that program under the Public Service Commission is only going to be in those areas of Time Warner, and that's why Time Warner is not available for the governor's program. Now, under the governor's program, Time Warner was not eligible, and there is differences of opinion as to what is going to be available within Warren County areas. I can tell you that this area has a priority because it is essentially unserved and underutilized to a great extent. So, what we have been looking at in working with the Federal Communication Commission and our consultant is what is called an E-rate program from the Federal Communication Commission. When you get your wireless bill, you will see a charge that says universal service at the bottom of the bill for a couple of bucks a month. That service is going toward a new improved program by E-rate for schools and for libraries. And the goal there is the reimbursement to the school or district is based on the level of free lunch reimbursement. So in the North Country, the range of reimbursement from the Warrensburg school may be around 75%. In North Warren may be around that area. So any capital improvements under this new program, the mechanism of reimbursement would be at 75% level, which is very good. The idea is to create a solid bank between a school and a library, particularly in some of these rural areas, and you have a base, and then from that base, we would utilize the program from the state of New York to extend the fiber into other areas of the communities. So you may end up with a series throughout the county, and this has to be determined as we go down the road of how is this going to be operated. Is it going to be strictly for giving the money to the providers, or is it going to be somewhat of an open access where there is another entity that works for this program? So conceivably in the North Warren area, you could develop a hard fiber between the North Warren School right off of the exit, all the way, down to, the municipal center and the library in that particular area. And that would be based on the capital cost would be reimbursed at the rate of the free lunch and paid back in 1 year. Total change in the, program. The second step then would be, is to evaluate the cost of extending veins, if you will, out into the other areas of the community, as one component, which would then again be reimbursable from the, state of New York at a lower level. So that's where the local government, that's where this entity will have to come in and see how we can get to that second level. Final aspect of this is to look at areas and identify any towers that are being proposed, and I think there are 2 new towers being proposed in Warren County, to see how far or close they are to a school or a library, and the same thing in other parts, and to run fiber from the school and, the library to the tower with fiber, which would enhance the ability. And so, Columbia and Green are looking at this. I have met, a couple of times with the Columbia Green people, and we have talked with Federal Communication about this. This is a revised program that we understand that there's not gonna be a perfect solution for broadband in this area. And we also have to look at, the location of these towers and looking at the relay or the repeaters, for, improved wireless, coverage in some areas. Again, because of the demographics, of our population and the terrain of our area, it makes it, very, difficult to come up with one solution for our region, so that we have the range of, and that's why, Evelyn did what she had to do up in, Thurman in order to have some viable communication out there. But the more and more we hear, I'm getting calls. Matt has provided me a number of constituents up in Brant Lake, the northern part of Brant Lake, that are part-time residents, but are looking to expand their, presence, in Warren County. We're getting calls, from, Warrensburg. We're getting calls, the new owners of 1,000 Acres, are, looking, and we're talking with Frontier. There's a tower not too far, from 1,000 Acres to see what we can do to help there. But again, it's just not a luxury, and we know that. It's really an economic development need that we have to put front and, center, in all of our, particularly our northern, areas. Glens Falls and Queensbury have a different problem. They keep wanting more width and speed. There are separate programs for that, but our focus right now, is looking at the northern part of, Warren County for these, services here, yes.
So, when would, you know, a town like Horicon see anything? I mean.
I can't answer that today, to be honest with you. Any answer I give, it really depends on, the E-rate program. We would need to have an application in later this year. If that E-rate went in, and I'm talking now connections between school districts, libraries, as well as emergency towers. There's a component of doing that. That could get underway late next year because there has to be a real good procurement, policy. And then to see how many of the school districts and libraries want to contribute, involvement with this. And this is where it has to be done on a regional basis. Because if you ask the individual libraries or school districts to authorize the borrowing of the money for the year, there's not gonna be many takers. I don't think Stony Creek Library is gonna want to, advance any money, because they may not have much money. So this is where we're going to have to look at an entity, such as a local development corporation to, undertake this, as a separate, distinctive operation for this to happen. Washington County is going through kind of the same review. They have taken some areas because their terrain is a lot different in terms of being more flat. They've got some hills. So they have been taking some areas and expanding to the Hudson Valley wireless. The difficulty is at some point, it's wonderful to have that level for public emergency and safety, is the ability to draw data on the wireless. If it's not, at a, appropriate bandwidth. There is a hindrance, but at least that's better coverage to do this. So that we've identified, the areas. Now what we have to really do is look at the variety of programs. We hope to have a broadband conference where we can bring in the representatives from the Federal Communication Commission to talk about their program, also the governor's office to talk about the broadband program, to see how we can mesh these programs together and see how we can go forward.
Supervisor Leggett?
So, up at the conference in Lake Placid
Yeah.
last week,
Right.
the PSC and others had,
Yeah.
had spoken about this. Mapping seems to be a big issue. Do we have
Yeah, we have,
numbers?
we have sufficient maps.
Okay.
That was done through the Gateway Council for Warren, Washington, and Northern Saratoga County.
Okay, because you spoke of two programs, but you did not speak directly of the Time Warner Charter merger and the 145,000 unserved homes that, do we have a chance of?
Time Warner is not, Time Warner is not eligible for this first round of monies, period. They didn't apply in this particular area for any money.
Right, but
And any area that is served by them was not eligible for this first round because of the Public Service Commission.
Aren't they obligated though, as part of the, to do it on their own dime?
The Public Service Commission is in the process of doing the rules and regulations on that right now. So, at some point, they are obligated to do this. Now, they're saying that they're supposed to start by 2017. I'm not trying to give a pessimistic, but I don't want to oversell the speed of this, of these programs. Because there is just a lot of information out there and a lot of, goodwill being extended, but the reality is it's gonna take a time for us to get, for us to get going. And at the end of the day, before the thing can kick off, there is going to be some requirement of some entity, to have to front end the dollars. And the most likely choice would be is to work with the Warren County in order to do this. You can't ask the individual communities and the small towns to be able to bear, this front end, so there has to be a lot of coordination. The logical choice is to work, through the Board of Supervisors, and then, if it's appropriate and deemed, a consensus, to look to create a local development corporation to, work through the open access, part of this here.
So the speed of the programs are about the same as the speed of your internet.
Yeah, we were very, Craig, we were very,
Internet might be better.
enthused when the programs were first announced. We have found that there's more than 147,000 customers in New York State that are in the Time Warner area that may be underserved. So it's just not unserved, it's underserved areas. And so we're talking, Time Warner, it spans the entire state of New York. So, we have to get in there, and we're not gonna give up on that program and pitch for, the western areas of, Warren County to be involved in that, program by, Time Warner, to take that over. But that's where this E-rate program, which just changed their regulations, in the last year, that makes that a potential in certain areas. Is every school district and every library gonna join in? Not necessarily. One of the problems that was uncovered, and we're just now doing a survey of sending out to the school districts and libraries, is many of them may have high speed, but what is the lease arrangements they have with the Verizon or AT&T? In some areas of the country, they have been charging in rural areas something like $2,500 to $3,500 a month. For their leasing arrangement. So those school districts looked upon this and said, our local share, we can flip from pay a lease payment into a ownership, and these providers have now come back in and offering lower rates. So this is part of the problems that some school districts have good fiber, and we just have to determine if they're interested, and what is their lease payment schedule. So we're developing a matrix of all the school districts and libraries in Warren County.
Supervisor Merlino, did you have something?
I'm not on this committee, I just got,
Okay.
I was up in Lake Placid for that class.
Yeah.
And Kevin, say if I'm wrong, but they were saying that you gotta have this stuff mapped out
We do.
perfectly. But that's not what the gentleman told us, because a lot of towns like Stony Creek, Warrensburg, Lake Luzerne, you got a third of the town but yet we're mapped out that we got it. He was emphasizing.
Those are from the providers, not from our maps. Our maps, I got a map right here.
He was emphasizing, we gotta make sure.
The problem is that the entire top group of the broadband by New York State Governor's Office has left the office 4 months ago and are in Washington with the Federal Communications Commission. So, not to be critical of the program, but this is the mapped out of showing the access in the area, including our cell towers in the area. And you can see the concentration in the southern part of Warren County and very little. You can go on the broadband site in New York State, and I suspect that when Evelyn was doing this, if you looked on the broadband site and the providers, they extend their coverage of what they perceive to be in the area, which is not accurate maps. The state of New York does not accept the maps that are on file with Verizon or Time Warner, and so each of the counties, we did this for all three, 2.5 counties, Warren, Washington, as well as northern Saratoga County, to show those areas.
And the red lines here are?
The red lines are Time Warner,
Okay, and green?
and green is the other remote areas of equipment locations for the green areas, and also the telephone fiber in the green area is telephone fiber. So you see, we have basically some semblance of a broad network in certain areas, but there's a heck of a lot of other, coverage that is missing, and, locally for some areas, Time Warner has, quoted a price of like $10,000 to $12,000, per mile.
Yeah.
So a local community does have that option if you want to expend, but again, you've got to do a survey, because not all your customers along the line may not want to join in at that price that Time Warner is going to charge. That's another part of the issue that has to be determined, is your subscription, to the area.
What we did is we took our roads, we have our roads listed separately and how many places on the
Right.
roads don't have it.
But it doesn't show, it just that roads in those areas just don't have, the coverage.
And in order
Right.
to expand and make the case, then, we would need to come up with the numbers of households not served.
We don't need
from
to,
the end of
do
that.
the number of households, we need to show them on a map what areas, are affected. They're not going to go in, if you have a street,
Yeah.
and a portion of it has coverage, another portion doesn't, and another, that's gonna go to a lower priority than massive areas of where there is, nothing, involved.
That's not what they told us.
I know.
Yeah.
That's not even close to what they told us.
Yeah. So are we at a point where the county could start looking into this to make
Yeah,
a
what we're gonna do is
coordinated
we're gonna
effort?
bring in the people that, will give you, their understanding of what the programs are from, the governor's office and from the Federal Communications Commission. And so that you will get to see how we can intertwine, these programs, in order to get it done.
The libraries help them out.
Here's what happens, Dennis, with that, a library, let's say like the Warrensburg, Library, which has a pretty good circulation and so forth up there. The library and the school district together, depending on where they are with their fiber and so forth, would be eligible for this program. And the cost would be determined, to link those two aspects together. That capital cost, would be reimbursed to the, school district and to the library at the percentage of the free lunch, reimbursement rate. So-
back to town.
Well, no, this would be, but the town then can assign the rights to and the libraries can assign this to a larger entity. Because you can't expect each of the libraries and school districts to be able to have that as their primary responsibility. They're not gonna go out and borrow. In order to tie in from, the Warrensburg School to the Warrensburg Library, what's the distance on that, Kevin? How far?
50 feet,
How many?
50 feet.
50 feet? And
For
that's
the
it?
elementary school.
Yeah, okay, but from the,
High school?
High school,
Probably a mile.
mile, okay. That capital cost, it has to be paid up front by some entity. After a year.
Sure will be the libraries.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. But 1 year, the federal government will reimburse at the rate that probably is in the range, do you know what the actual free lunch capacity, percent, about 75?
It's up there, 60 to
Okay.
70.
So 60 to 70% of that would be paid, by the federal government.
But is that just to make the service
That's the capital.
faster?
No, that's to put, that,
I mean,
that
they
is-
have Wi-Fi in the library now.
Okay, what is the lease arrangement? Who, see, that's what that's part of our survey, is to find out, their lease may be fairly expensive. But the school districts, recognizing the importance, of having that in their library and in the school district, have gone ahead and done that. And we just wanna find out if it's a reasonable rate or not.
I'm so confused because we were told something entirely
Yep,
different.
I don't understand that. But this program I'm talking about has nothing to do with the
No,
government
I
program.
understand your school
On the
district.
E-rate.
He did touch on that at the end.
Yeah.
But he was basically telling us that everybody will be covered by 2017. They,
That's impossible. In 1 year.
did they not tell us that in front of God and country?
45,000 homes.
Because we asked about we asked about Stony Creek.
Curiosity, Ed, this page, clarify for me, what is this shading area here?
It's unserved, essentially unserved, or very underutilized
Okay,
areas.
so that's not,
This would be the eligible, this is being deemed the, eligible
so they
areas.
deemed the wilderness, the Adirondack Park eligible, okay.
And that's
That
a
was very
whole,
helpful.
that's a whole nother issue with towers.
They're not gonna get them.
Yeah, but the other thing is, there's no point in serving that.
Of course,
Serving
of course
what,
not.
you know,
Yeah.
the way,
It looks good on a map.
it looks
Yeah, so what
wonderful.
we're imposing the population basis.
Because, yeah, there's no people who live in that area, so.
That's right.
All right, well, thank you, Ed, appreciate, the confusion. Can we get, a motion to adjourn? Supervisor Simpson, Supervisor Wood, thank you. Now start.